Hello, I'm Mark Buchanan, President of the RMSA, Rocky Mountain Scottish Athletes. Best way to reach me, perhaps, is at 4c17@yahoo.com. And let me spell that out. It's the letter 4, spelled it FOURC17@yahoo.com. And in the subject line, just make sure it says Highland Games.
Okay. And now take a few minutes and tell us how you got involved in the Highland Games.
Well, back in 1975, when my family was on a sabbatical leave from my father's law firm, it was the summer before my senior year in college, and I was actually training for my senior year in football. And my parents wanted us to see Scottish sports, so we went and saw the British Open in Carnoustie, and then we went and saw Highland Games as well. And I remember at the time thinking, that's the dumbest sport in the world. And yet, years later when I was coaching football at the Colorado Springs Pikes Peak Festival, came to Coronado High School, and they needed a fence put up, a security fence, $400 for 2 hours worth of work. I said, that's a lot of car washes, man, and we can do that. So they did that. In 2 hours we had it up. I had 4 kids with Scottish surnames helping me do it. And then I went over and picked out a tall guy that I'd seen at the local games before, a guy named Dave Duff, who introduced me to the games. The next day he said, just come on out, we'll put a kilt on you, and you can try them. And that was all the way back in 1998, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow. Okay. And so tell us a little bit about what you do. You're a coach, correct? Mm-hmm. Tell us how that meshes with what you do in the Highland Games.
Well, the coaching that I do is really pretty informal. We have a practice most Saturdays.
So you're also a coach in high school?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, I coached football and track for most of the time I was in high school. And so I did the weight events, shot put, discus, and for both boys and girls. And so I thought that the Highland Games kind of naturally translated. Certainly the stone events were very much like the shot put. And the discus is not like the weights for distance, simply because of this difference in weight. But the turning in the circle is similar to turning in the trig. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, those things kind of naturally equated. But as soon as I picked up a heavy weight for distance, I said, no, this is not like the discus.
Right. Okay. And so, when you have the experience with the shot put and then also with the stone, what are some of the coaching techniques? What is the similarity and what are some of the differences? Without getting into too much detail, more of an overview.
The stones and the shot are very similar. What we have in the Highland Games, of course, is 2 events. We have the Braemar, 22 pound for men. Is it 16 for women?
9 to 13.
9 and 13, okay. So you have a heavy and a lighter stone. With the heavier stone, you simply stand in place and you do the same thing that in the shot put is known as a lag throw, just a stand and throw. And with the open, well, then you approach either with a slide or a glide, or sometimes some people will do a full spin to get the torque in the hips to throw it.
Okay. All right. And so have you had a lot of your high school students transfer into the games, or?
Yeah, especially when they came back in about 6 years ago. I had a number of them come out. Craig Carley, Ricky Lobato, a few of the fellas I know. But really, the word gets out in the gyms around here. We just have a lot of people show up at the practices, and so, like I say, the kind of informal coaching we do is just, we kind of show what we're doing. And Eddie Moore, Joe Moore, and Skip Helm do as much as I do. Mm-hmm. It's kind of neat to see people who you've kind of coached then go on to be able to coach others, and everybody kind of develops a little different feel for it. And so I actually learned by listening to them about what they're trying to emphasize. I think, gosh, I guess I'd forgotten that's such an important part of the event. So it's kind of neat to kind of watch them coach as well.
And we will be interviewing those two as well. And how long have they been a part of the Pikes Peak?
Skip is approaching 10 years now. He threw for a year, and he went to the World Championships in Denver in 2010 and in Scotland in 2014. Joe entered about 5 years ago and has just rocketed to near the top of the men's under 200. Has gotten done it very fast. He threw both the wire hammer and I believe it's the shot put in college as well as played football. So it was a pretty easy transition for him.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your winnings. Give us your stats.
Oh, well, I'm perpetually second place, it seems, in the Scottish Masters. I have won 3 times in 13 years, but they're few and far between. I did win in Scotland in 2006, first time it was held there. I was 52 years old at that time and won the 50 to 54. I went down in Albuquerque in 2013. As a 59-year-old, I was headed out of the thing and still managed to win that category. And I won just last year in Germany at 64 on my way out of that category. It's kind of nice because I think I beat some younger people in those two. But I have such 2 great friends in games, Frank Henry and Bill Leffler. And you know, whenever all 3 of us are at the games, it seems it's just what order we shuffle first, second, and third. It's been a tremendous friendship and a real motivating thing in the off season to try to be ready to try and beat those guys each year.
Okay. What would you say is the main reason you stay in the games?
The camaraderie of it, and I still love to throw. I love to practice. I like to go out on my own, really, over to Thorndale Park here on a weekday at 11 in the morning when everybody else is at work, and I'm now at least semi-retired, and I can schedule my day and just get inside my own head and work on the throws and try and review what I've learned at clinics. Of late, Ryan Seckman's technique and a hammer is something I've been trying to make sure I'm incorporating. So, but I just love the discipline of it all. I like the off-season lifting weights, and I just like the whole idea of showing up at a festival with kilts and bagpipes and heavy things to throw, and you know, maybe have a little scotch afterwards.
Okay. And so while we're talking about that, you are Scottish, Buchanan.
Buchanan's a Scottish surname. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And tell us, did you have any, was that in any part of your growing up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, behind me here is a Buchanan family crest, as my dad carved it when I wasn't even a teenager yet when he first did that. But that kind of got us focused on that. As I said, the summer of 1975, we spent in Scotland when I first saw the games. And but it wasn't until age 44 that it kind of came back. As I explained earlier, we put up that security fence at Coronado High School, and I went out and did my first games, and I was kind of hoping the athletes wouldn't come by and see me, but sure enough they came up and one of them yelled, "Hey, Coach is in a dress!" And so the nickname Coach has stuck ever since. It doesn't necessarily derive from my coaching the sport, it's more from my athletes picking me out at my first games. And one of them shouting to the other, and I could hear it in the distance. I thought, oh God, here it comes.
Yeah.
But I've grown to be very comfortable in the kilt, and I'm not the least bit embarrassed, as I was that first time.
Okay. All right. And so let's go back to your coaching. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the Pikes Peak group.
Okay. Pikes Peak Scottish athletes just kind of grew out of me throwing by myself, and then Skip coming along and wanting to do it and sticking with it. And over the years, other guys have come along, and some of us stuck with it more than others. One of the neatest things that's happened is the Fort Carson soldiers that are stationed here from time to time will get a hold of us, and they might be here for only a year or 2 years, and then they're deployed somewhere else. But they've been some of the most interesting and fun to try and coach. And some of them, when they come back after a deployment, will come back with us too. One of the neatest stories was a guy a couple of years ago, first name Will, I've forgotten his last name, but he went through in Scotland, and then he waded into the River Dee and found a stone that he then brought back through the airport, got it here, and it weighed exactly 22 pounds. So, Will, wherever you are in the world now, I will never forget that story. I'd be backpacking a 22-pound stone through airports back here to Colorado Springs.
So you guys throw a real Scottish stone.
Well, he took it with him wherever he's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in that case, it really was, yeah.
Okay. All right. So you are also the president of RMSA. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
RMSA is an old organization that dates back to the 1960s. It was started by Greg Bradshaw's father, and even at the featured games in Denver, they still give the, I think it's called the Hank Bradshaw Caber Award. There's young Hank too, the grandson who runs the Elizabeth games. Greg has for years run usually the Denver Festival that was at Highlands Ranch for so many years, the Colorado Scottish Festival. Went to snowmaster for 3 years and is now back in Denver. But that organization started back then, and in recent years it's been largely the work of other Denver folks, particularly Wayne Staggs and his family, who often make the equipment, drive it to the games, score the games, judge at the games, set up and break down. And it's really through the Stagg family that I get this notion that we're something of a clan, because it is the same people that show up everywhere and do all the setup and all the tear down. You can just guarantee that. And as soon as I start trying to name people, I'll forget somebody, so I'm not going to try to do anything more than just say the Stagg family in general is sort of the core of it. I became president a number of years ago, 6 years ago I think, 5 years maybe, and I was a little worried that, being outside the Denver area, that this was maybe not the natural thing, but it's worked just fine, and I'm kind of ending the end of probably what will be my tenure. And the games are really growing, particularly in northern Colorado, so it's a good chance that in the Front Range here, from Colorado Springs up to Windsor, Fort Collins, and maybe one day down to Pueblo, we've got an organization that's really solid that way. So that may be too much detail, but that's what I can say.
That's fine. Okay.
I could go on and say that we've had a real partnership over the years as well with two local groups, the New Mexico Scottish Celtic athletes, and for a time the Black Hills Scottish athletes as well. So our whole Front Range, we think of everything from Albuquerque and even south of there up through nowadays Cheyenne, but it used to go as far as Gillette, Wyoming, and so a lot of us participate in those games. And this year we're going to move across the Rockies to Grand Junction as well.
Okay. All right. And so if you were a young thrower, I've got lots of questions about prospective throwers and young throwers and current throwers.
Okay.
So I guess this would be more geared toward the current thrower. How can they become involved in the organization itself, and would you recommend that, and in what level and capacity?
The nice thing is that now there's probably a practice somewhere near where you live. They will be starting up in Pueblo. They already have. We, in the springs, tend to start in April because I don't like to break cabers on the frozen ground.
Right.
You put too much work into making a caber. Of course, northern Colorado and Arvada and Wheat Ridge are all sites. There are a few folks out in Parker who maybe would be available to coach with as well, to learn about. And certainly our web page for Rocky Mountain Scottish Athletes lists a whole number of practices. If you go to the events page, along with the games on one side, is a whole list of where practices are and contact information for people, such as Linda, to contact. And practices generally take place on any given weekend, weather permitting, and then there's a number of other special events too.
Okay. And so tell me a little bit about we're focusing on RMSA right now, but tell me a little bit about the judging. How does somebody become a judge? Do they have to have experience?
They don't, throwing? Not necessarily, but they should be familiar with the games. There are 9 events, and so being able to judge all 9 events is what you tend to do. You go with a group. I've gone to large world competitions where you judge just one event, you stay there, and the athletes come to you. And then you just need to know about one event. And that's what I used to do in track as well. I would do the discus ring generally. Okay. But in this case, you go with a group, and you go through the series of events. So most of us are familiar with the shot put. You can imagine starting there, and it's you just have to be able to judge. They stay within the trig and they don't foul, and it's the same as you move to the weights for distance. And the hammer's kind of hard to foul in unless you just follow with the trig.
Which happens.
Yeah, it happens. And then it's, of course, measuring each throw, and in our case, we measure it to the 100th of an inch because of our decathlon scoring system. The caber is a very different sort of event where you trail behind the person carrying the caber. You have to be at least semi-aware that it's not coming back over on you, but you're going to try and, the caber is an interesting event where it goes straight over and lands on what would have been the top end, and then hopefully continues on straight away to what's called a 12 o'clock throw. So as you're running behind the athlete stops at what was at 6 o'clock, tosses into the middle of the clock, and if it falls anywhere between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, it's scored. If it comes back, well, then we estimate as best we can the angle that it reached, approaching 90 degrees, and we can score that as well.
Okay. And is judging something that most athletes will aspire to be involved in?
I think the longer you get it, the more you do. We have, like a lot of things, a lot of young athletes will be in for a while, and they sometimes try the games and then go on to something else. But I think for most of those who've been in 5, 6, 7 years, most people do gravitate towards being a judge, especially the older you get, you don't necessarily want to throw in every games. Or, in my case, as an athletic director, I would rather not throw in my own games most years. I mean, if it's in a competitive schedule, when I'm preparing towards the Worlds, I might do it that year. I had a fellow competitor, Bill Leftwood, come out one time. I thought, well, I really better throw it since Bill's coming all the way out here from Missouri. But as the athletic director, I would prefer to be able to, get a lot number of people to do things, and then maybe I can also do a group in one day.
Okay. And so, speaking of athletic directors, how does one become an athletic director for the RMSA?
Well, generally, if you're the kind of the local guy in your area that's running the practices and there's a games coming in your area, well, then you'll often get asked by the local committee to do it. In the case of Pikes Peak Celtic Festival, been gone for almost 15 years. It was there for the first 2 or 3 years that I started. It went away until, I'm guessing it's 2013 that it came back. So the last time we had a games here was about the year 2000. So it was gone for a full 12, maybe 13 years, came back in 2013. And I was at that point kind of the senior guy in the area that had been throwing. So, and having an athletic background as both a coach and having been organizationally involved in things, not as an athletic director at a school, but understanding how to run an event, that helps.
Okay. All right. And so you have lots of opportunity to do this privately, but if a person were coming to you, had no experience in track and field, athletics in general, and definitely not in the Scottish Games, what would your advice be to that person if they were interested and they wanted to know more?
I'd say start with the stone. I think it's the easiest of the events to do. And, well, maybe not in terms of scoring a long distance, but I think that it's the easiest to introduce. The toughest one to introduce is the caber. And yet it's the one that they always seem to want to start with when they first come. And we start with just wanting them to be able to pick it up, what's called the pick. And so we'll often spend 1 or 2 practices just getting to do that, and then learning how to set it down so it doesn't break the caber and so it doesn't hurt you. But so in my opinion, from stone through caber, there's sort of a progression. The oddest event in many ways is the pitchfork with the bail known as the sheaf, and you're throwing that over a shoulder. Many of us being right-handed would throw it over our left shoulder over what's the equivalent of a pole vault standard that may go up to 36 feet in some cases. Usually would start somewhere in the teens, and depending on the ability of the group and the weight of the sheaf could go quite high. So I think the sheaf and the caber are the most technical. Certainly of all the traditional distance events, the hammer is the most unique in terms of the combination of things you need to do in terms of rotating the hammer behind you over your head. And many people will boot themselves into the ground with spikes in their boots to hold themselves so they can arch back and throw. So, you kind of need to learn events one at a time, and again, stone's the easiest to learn. And I would guess weight for distance and hammer are comparable. The weight over bar is of the height events. I consider the caber a height event, most people don't. It's an accuracy event, technically. But the explosiveness with which you throw the weight over bar, the sheaf, and the caber are all upward events for which the Olympic lifts are most technical and do the best job of sport-specific development.
So would you recommend that they go to the gym first or that they come out to the field?
A lot of people will see it first at a festival. I don't think you need to necessarily train in order to be introduced to the games. Mostly if you look at it and you think, I think I could do that, you ought to come and try it. But certainly if you get serious about it, then, especially in the off season, you would want to train. But you don't want to do a whole lot of lifting and throwing at the same time. So it's much like we would do with a track athlete in high school. We would want to have them lift through the winter period into the spring, and as we start throwing, we might do a little bit early season lifting, but as it's getting towards the end, and certainly as you go through the games as a Scottish athlete, you should be doing a lot more throwing practice than lifting.
Okay. So what would you tell a current athlete? If you had a room of athletes, what would you talk to them about improving themselves as not only athletes, athletes in the sport, but also as participants in the sport?
Okay.
Ambassadors, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, this is a 9-event competition, goes all day, and yet it's not necessarily one for which a great deal of stamina is necessary. It's not throwing events. It's not like the decathlon of running, jumping, throwing. So strength is at a premium, and the movements are rapid and explosive over a relatively small period of time. I would think that in some way, well, the caber can be the longest event, and that it might take several seconds to pick it, balance it, approach, and throw. The hammer can take some time, but you know, the explosive force that's generated happens in an instant. So everything else you're doing is preparing for that release of the throw in some way. So I may have gotten off on a tangent a little bit here, but I think I would tell the athletes that they want to think in terms of their training as moving through, this I think will be helpful, through not so much muscles as to combinations of joint complexes. What I mean by that is if you'll picture your ankle, your knee, your hips is the most explosive, your shoulder girdle, those are major areas in an upward plane. And in rotational, you know, it extends through the elbows and wrists right into the fingertips, and it really grows out of the ground right out of your toes. So it's been talked about as being a chain, as if you could take a loose chain and suddenly lock it out, and each one of those joints would be like the joint complexes that you're working across. So yes, you develop your muscles, but you develop your muscles in such a way that they have to work in combination. This is why something like curls is not nearly as useful as cleans, okay, where you're moving from below the knees and the bar is going explosively to a rack position, or even to a clean and jerk position overhead. I think that I became good in the games initially because I was teaching my football athletes to do those lifts, and I was doing them with them. And you know, those translated right away into the caber. I became a pretty good caber thrower pretty quickly. As soon as I could kind of pick it and hold it in position and approach with it, I had the explosion all ready to do it.
Okay, all right. So what's next for Mark?
Well, Mark will keep doing this for a while. I entered the 65 category this year. It's well, all of us will keep moving together. You know, you don't just do this alone. So we'll move through that. But for Mark, locally, you know, we have a really unique system with the combination of decathlon scoring and then a handicap as you move through the Masters for both men and women. We're looking to revamp that because when it was first done, there were no 65-year-old throwers, there were no 60-year-old throwers. And we now have an 80-year-old thrower, 2 70-year-old throwers, a number of 60-year-old throwers, and the projected progression is something that we're finding as we've gone through the games we don't need, and it's in fact making it a little bit unfair for the younger masters to have to compete against those ratios. So Tyler Baker is doing a great job of revamping those numbers, and so that's something we're currently working on. But I think Mark will continue throwing for a while. I've been lucky to avoid injury, and one of the things I think I've learned is that less is more. You know, quit when you have the first twinge of something coming on, and be smart in how you prepare, and don't, I mean, I've been known to go extra long in a practice and feel like I've got to hit that distance before I go home, but I usually pay for it with the ibuprofen bottle when I do.
Okay, so we are going to take a few minutes and look at some of the things that you have on the wall, and you can tell stories about it.
Okay.
But before we get there, final words that you'd like to share with the non-throwing public and also current athletes. Just final thoughts.
I once upon a time felt that this was a really crazy thing to do. I mentioned the story in Scotland. But it's addicting, and what I mean by that is, you know, as a track coach, I would go and watch my shot putters and my discus throwers throw 3 times in the morning, 3 times in the afternoon. This is all day, and if you have a bad event, you just go right on to the next one. There's a real camaraderie about this, and I've been the beneficiary of it. You know, I walked into it, and I've tried to make sure that all of us in the area extend that as well. You'll not have any more fun at any one thing than this. I mean, you know, when I was younger, I ran marathons, you know, and there was a tremendous camaraderie to that. But you know, you outgrow that in terms of my size. But I've never had more fun competing in something extending. I realize now that I've been competing in Highland Games from age 44 to 65. That's 21 years. I plan to be able to go another 5 or 6 years probably, and then the weights will come down, so I'll probably still want to do it then if my health holds up. But I didn't do football, basketball, or anything nearly as long. And so it's something that you can do for a lifetime, oddly enough. There's that other Scottish sport of golf. I'll be honest, I get more sore trying to hit a lot of practice balls and make it through 18 holes. And I get more sore in the back than I do from throwing cavers and things. It's probably just the plane of movement that I've trained for as opposed to the one I haven't trained for. But you can think of Scottish athletics as a lifetime sport just as you might golf.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. So explain your wall of fame.
Well, as I said, the core thing is the Buchanan shield there. And that's the rampant lion. And the Scottish flag actually has a red version of this. And I believe the lion may be reversed. But that is actually the Buchanan family crest, as carved by my father years and years ago when I was young. And since it's a shield, I thought maybe a commemorative sword of the claymore style would be worth having. This is a replica sword. It's not a real one, and it's like the ones that we gave away for first place in 2010 at the Masters World Championships in Denver. So I just held on to one of those after ordering 33 and sending them out other places. The pictures that we see, the illustration near the sword is that of a hammer thrower. That's done by my good friend and a great gentleman of the games, Ron McIntosh, who's an art teacher in Wyoming as well as a competitor in the Masters group. The needle point of a caber tosser was something that my wife did a number of years ago. Caber's kind of my favorite event, and so she kind of did that as a Christmas present a number of years ago, and I was surprised to see it on Christmas morning.
All right. So we've got to go over your Hall of Fame there.
Well, the Hall of Fame is something it's a real treasured thing that you can reach in the games and the Masters. This is something that Kevin Rogers sponsors, and after myself working to put Ian Percy and Wayne Staggs and Al Stagner, all three Colorado throwers, into the Hall, and to contribute some other ones, I found that my good friend Frank Henry back east had managed to get me put in the Hall too. It was kind of fun at my acceptance speech because I was able to have both Bill Loeffler and Frank Henry stand up and say, "See, Bill over here has 8 world championships and Frank has 5 and I have 2. I said, "But I have been second place more often than not, which means one of those 2 guys is finishing third in those other ones." And so that's the kind of camaraderie that we have.
Yeah.
The other stuff here is there's some golf balls from playing courses in Scotland in 2014, the year of the World Championships, when my son went along. Actually, I guess that was more in 2009, the second time. And then there's just some scotches that we've been gifted. There's Buchanan's is an old version of a blended scotch, and there's a couple of versions there. The decanter in the middle is actually from that World Championship in 2006. It was a neat thing they did. I will sometimes put scotch in there, but it'll fade like iced tea does in the sunlight, so I often don't. I take it out for an occasion. And the rest of the stuff is just various trophies from some of the World Championships. Scotland 2014 is the nice bowl over there. This near one with the medals is the most recent one in Germany. What they did was put a hammer that you could fly home with.
Oh, yeah.
Thing, and I've just kind of draped those over because that's the most recent thing, and I like to remind myself that occasionally I do win. The one over here, the weight for distance, is from 2015 in St. Louis, and in the back, Costa Mesa is a really neat award. There's a sword sticking out of it, but it's really just a 22-pound hammer that has Costa Mesa on it for first place in the Masters that year. It's not anything I'm going to ever put on a pipe and throw. It's too nice, but it's also, I haven't found any way to do it other than put it in a corner and hope that it doesn't roll off onto the floor.
Okay.
So anyway, this is sort of a way to take all the Buchanan trips to Scotland. Our daughter got a PhD at the University of Glasgow, so we had a lot of reasons to go over the years. But there's been 3 World Championships over there, and just a lot of little Scottish, memorabilia. There's a series of patches there from all the World Championships, and one day I think on this wall I'll probably put the kilt, and Mary will stitch all of the those up there. A lot of guys will wear those right from the start when they get them, but I kind of think they're more of a memory thing than that. So I've never taken the time to put them on, but there's 13 of those patches there, and maybe a few more before we do that.
Okay.
We moved into this house 25 years ago. Above the hearth was this rather odd arched place in which to put something. And my dad, who continued carving and became quite good over the years, said he'd like to do something for us, and so we arrived on this idea of having the eagle over the top of the Colorado Rockies, as symbolized by a couple of Rocky Mountain sheep. And there's some, down here in the bottom are some columbine and other wildflowers as you might find them in the Rockies. And so this is something he entitled High Above, and it'll probably stay with the house when we leave, because I don't know where else we would put it. I don't know that we'll be leaving though for some time, so maybe it would be passed on. But anyway,
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's
The work is stunning.
well, they got quite good. He went from making a kind of a flat, rampant line without a lot of relief on the original thing, and this is probably 40 years later.
Wow.
So
It's holding up really well too.
yeah, this was done when I was in my 40s as we moved in, and that other one was before I was a teenager. I guess must represent some 30 years of developing his technique.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing.
You bet. Thank you.